So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, dear colleagues. My name is Noah Mayhew. I am a senior research associate at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this NPT side event. Late last year, the VCDNP initiated a project with the generous support of Switzerland that focused on negotiating verification across nuclear arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. Our discussion today will focus on the outcomes of that project. The idea of the project was that while verification approaches and concepts in these three areas may overlap, there is also important conceptual and practical distinctions between them. By way of example, a successful verification system requires, on one hand, technical and sometimes military expertise to ensure that verification is feasible, effective, and acceptable to all parties, and on the other hand, political and diplomatic expertise to negotiate and implement them. We'll open our session today with opening remarks and observations from Ambassador Matteo Facchinotti, who is Switzerland's permanent representative to the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty organization in Vienna. I'll then talk to you a bit about the primary findings that we got from the project as well as the recommendations, and then turn to Dr. Nikolai Sokov, a senior fellow at the VCDNP and former arms control negotiator, for his insights on what you, the NPT states parties, could direct your energy towards now and in the near future in this regard. With that, Ambassador Facchinotti, the floor is yours, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, NOAA and VCDNP for this partnership on this important project. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this side event on negotiating nuclear verification across arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. As all of you know, all three of these fields are facing challenges today. Arms control negotiations have stalled. Progress on disarmament is not really moving forward, at least not as quickly as we would like. And we're now attending the NPT Review Conference, where all of us are working towards a political breakthrough that would facilitate a consensus outcome. This is why we should prioritize maintaining the capacity of states parties to engage on questions of verification, so that when progress on arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation is moving forward, we're able to act swiftly. In this light, the government of Switzerland was pleased to support the VCDNP to implement a project on negotiating nuclear verification. As Noah noted, this project consisted of a workshop and supporting research to help maintain states parties' capacity on negotiating nuclear verification, looking holistically at arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. It also brought together a diverse group of stakeholders from both nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states. This last point is important in connection with the work of the International Partnership for Nuclear Disarmament Verification, or IPNDV. Since its inception in 2014, Switzerland has supported the IPNDV as a forum for nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states to work collaboratively on multilateral verification approaches and refine the concepts through field and tabletop exercises. Nikolai and Noah will talk about the results of this project over the course of our discussion today. I'd like to invite everyone to engage with their recommendations and to participate in the discussion. After all, as we're here at the NPT Review Conference, we should be aware that effective arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation benefit all states parties, and that all states parties are bound by NPT's Article 6 on nuclear disarmament. We need to continue to maintain the capacity to negotiate nuclear verification and build it in states that do not already have such capacity. With this, I'd like to thank again VCDNP for their efforts, and I look forward to hearing the results of the project and to the discussion that will follow. Noah, back to you.
Thank you for your kind words, Ambassador, and again for being here today. Before I jump into the substance, there are sign-up sheets being passed around the table, and Ambassador, if you could just push that one further that way, the little scrap of paper. I will talk about the report just now, but if any of you would like to receive a copy of it, please feel free to put your email address there, and I will send it out after this meeting, and there will be a QR code as well. So, as discussed, I'll now get into the main findings of the project and our recommendations. Given this context that Ambassador Facinotti described, the need we wanted to address in the project was twofold. First, we wanted to give diplomats, military experts, and policymakers the opportunity to build capacity on nuclear verification in general and aspects of negotiations in particular. Second, through the report that I've just mentioned, and like I said, there will be a QR code for you to scan at the end of this presentation as well as at your seats, we wanted to give these same groups future reference to help maintain that capacity and build understanding of what it takes to negotiate nuclear verification. So we started in the report with an abridged history of the verification of arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. I think there's a tendency to take for granted that we do verification a certain way because we always did it this way. And in reality, the design of verification systems over the years evolved based on the needs associated with the agreement, with what the agreement was trying to meet. What is the goal we're trying to achieve? What is the risk that we're trying to address? These questions are as old as the nuclear age itself. Already in 1945, the international community was trying to grapple with how we can make best use of atomic energy for peaceful purposes while preventing new countries from joining the weapons club. And at that time, the term safeguards first appeared, but there were difficulties in figuring out what were these safeguards and how would they be implemented. Eventually, we figured out that inspections would be a good way to implement safeguards, but that wouldn't be enough. We would need to do other things, like take measurements and samples. And this became, over the years, the basis of non-proliferation verification as we understand it today, particularly after the IAEA was founded. When the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was agreed between the US and the Soviet Union, we added national technical means to the list, so to say, satellite imagery. And then finally, the NPT comes into force, and the IAEA has to figure out how to fulfill its obligation to apply safeguards on all nuclear material and all peaceful nuclear activities. And under what became known as comprehensive safeguards agreements, we added more verification tools explicitly named in the agreements, containment and surveillance, for example. In the 1970s, as the US and the Soviet Union began to negotiate on bilateral arms control, the earlier agreements essentially relied on national technical means. By the time we got to the INF Treaty and START 1 in the 80s and the 90s, the suite of tools for arms control verification grows to include things like on-site inspections, managed access, and other measures codified in very detailed verification protocols. Now, returning to non-proliferation, 1990s, the US and Russia see that they've got quite a lot of weapons-grade material with classified characteristics that is excess to defense needs. Here we have another suite of tools to include process monitoring for HEU downblending, attribute verification with information barriers to verify certain characteristics of the material without releasing classified information, and by the way, even sometimes with the involvement of the IAEA. We also had strengthened safeguards with the various tools available under the Model Additional Protocol, allowing for greater access and provision of data. And then 90s being a very busy time, 96, we also have the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty adopted in the UNGA, which you could say employed quasi-international technical means through various monitoring stations on the territories of states signatories. Both in arms control and non-proliferation, we see the value of layering different sources of data on top of one another to provide confidence that the terms of an agreement are being observed. And we also see a bit later, New START, that as complex verification systems might need to be, there is value in streamlining those systems to ensure maximal cost efficiencies and minimal intrusiveness. And finally, the word that I have not said yet, disarmament verification, including between nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states. Now, we obviously have not seen this yet at a global scale. But as we see initiatives like the Quad and the International Partnership for Nuclear Disarmament Verification developing new approaches to practices like managed access and gaming out how non-nuclear weapon states can contribute to the disarmament verification process. So that was not meant to be a comprehensive overview of how we got here, right? Abridged history. What it was meant to do is to give us an idea of how far we've come on relying purely on national technical means for verification of these agreements to these very complex systems, all tailored to the specific goal that a given agreement is trying to reach. To get a more general idea of the technologies available, and I did just mention some of them, take a look at the report for more detail, but we've got national technical means like satellite imagery, inspections, including those that are routine or planned, those that are short notice, those that are challenge inspections, permanent or interim facility monitoring, data exchange, like the declarations of locations and status of treaty-limited items, sensors like gamma ray and neutron radiation detectors to characterize the nuclear material that we're looking at, sampling of the nuclear material, both destructive and non-destructive, containment like tags and seals, surveillance like cameras, information barriers to ensure the inspecting party only gets the data that they need to have confidence in compliance. Now, it's important to note in this regard also that these terms have different names sometimes between arms control and non-proliferation, but often mean basically the same thing. What is data exchange if not a declaration, right? This, like my previous list, is not meant to be exhaustive. I didn't mention all of the tools because there are too many. The point I'm trying to make here is simply that depending on the agreement, the parties may choose one tool over another, or even one type of tool over another type of the same tool. It's all in the agreement, and it all happens at the negotiating table. So verification approaches. The tools for nuclear verification I just mentioned do not exist in a vacuum. They're chosen and implemented based on the goals of the parties at the negotiating table, as I said. These goals may differ between arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation, but ultimately what is true for all three is the need to achieve so-called sufficient confidence that the requirements of a given agreement are being observed. For arms control, there are a few basic approaches to ensuring that treaty-limited items remain under compliance, that requisite reductions are being implemented, or that no other activities are taking place that would contravene the terms of the agreement itself. We can use these so-called legacy approaches to arms control, right? So to say, on-site inspections supplemented by sampling and measurements. Under arms control, these measures have thus far applied to delivery vehicles rather than the nuclear warheads themselves, thus bringing us to the question of what the next step in verification might look like. And that's the nuclear warheads themselves, or so we argue. Now, there are two potential approaches envisioned here for warheads, and probably more the more research you do. One is focused on the warheads themselves, and another focused on the facilities that produce and maintain them. It's important to note here that the two approaches are not mutually exclusive, and that the facility-based approach may follow the warhead-based approach. Now, under the warhead-based approach, we're looking at activities such as warhead tracking and containment, as well as direct or indirect verification of warhead attributes, like maybe isotopics. Considering the sensitivities around nuclear weapon design, this approach would require procedures to be in place, such as these information barriers I mentioned, to conceal classified or weapon-sensitive information. And the equipment used for verification would also have to be authenticated by the parties to ensure that it only yields the information relevant to the agreement and nothing more. Now, if we're looking at rather facility-focused verification, the discussion could be measurably simpler in the sense that we're looking at a similar suite of tools to IAEA safeguards, but that go far beyond what safeguards cover today. This would mean no more military enrichment or reprocessing facilities, no more pit production facilities, and so on. All of these facilities would likely be under permanent monitoring, and many of the tools I just mentioned would need to be used to ensure that no weapon-sensitive information was revealed. On that note, the approaches to non-proliferation verification itself are rather quite clear. Here we are talking about IAEA safeguards, or a version of the safeguard system that extends beyond what the agency does today, either implemented by the agency itself or by a new, different organization. We're talking the basic stuff: containment and surveillance, data exchange, sampling and non-destructive testing, open source information, stuff the IAEA does today. Verification approaches on disarmament, on the other hand, are a touch more nebulous. While the initiatives like the Quad and the IPNDV have done fantastic and important work on developing approaches for things like managed access, in which non-nuclear weapon states would participate, we haven't done nuclear disarmament verification on a large scale yet. And all I can say here is that support for the work that these important initiatives, as well as the UN group of scientific and technical experts for nuclear disarmament verification, should continue so that when we're really talking about global scale disarmament, it can be implemented as we have the agreement. So I've mentioned that arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation have points of convergence, but also points of divergence. There are a few things that I would flag, although this could really even be a study of its own. First, we've got the legal status of the agreements. What is legally binding, what is politically binding, and what does that even mean in practice? In all three spheres, legally binding agreements are the obvious preference. Every party to the agreement has a clearly outlined understanding of their obligations and what the associated verification measures are. Even for those not party to the agreement, can point to the text and say, this is what we're doing, this is how we're proving to you that we're doing it. In arms control, we've had primarily legally binding agreements, with the exception of the presidential nuclear initiatives, which were unilateral steps taken between the US and the Russian Federation in the 1990s. In terms of disarmament for verification, however, the only legally binding instruments we have are the NPT, which of course has Article 6 obligations, and the TPNW, which also lacks specific, explicit verification mechanisms. South Africa's disarmament, for its part, was not mandated by any legally binding instrument and was verified post factum with measures more generally associated with non-proliferation. So another thing to consider here is accounting procedures in terms of divergence and convergence, where verification activities can take place and what kinds of information can be verified. Now, the US and Russia have a long history of discussing nuclear arms control and developing procedures for things like access to sensitive weapons-related facilities. As both of these countries have nuclear weapons, they're able to be a bit more open with one another than they might be with non-nuclear weapon states when it comes to weapon-sensitive information. Even in the context of US-Russian agreements, the level of secrecy behind aspects like isotopic composition and the mass of weapons origin material is quite high and probably would be higher if non-nuclear weapon states were involved. When it comes to disarmament, we indeed know very little, except for this level of secrecy would not be going away and probably would introduce additional complications. Think about aspects like nuclear weapons know-how. How do you ensure that the weapons scientists keep their expertise to themselves? How do you ensure that a weapons complex is really dismantled? These are questions that will plague the non-proliferation community during and post-disarmament, especially as the IAEA, and presumably any other body verifying the maintenance of a disarmed end state, will not have access to proliferation-sensitive information. The third thing I'd like to put on the table is the question of cost, and I can be short here because the cost issue is highly specific to what we're talking about across all three of these activities. Arms control, always been financed by the countries doing the arms controlling. Disarmament, well, there's been talk of an international fund in the past, but these discussions have not gone anywhere. Does the IAEA do it? Does another international body do it? We don't know. And then in terms of non-proliferation, we do have a bit of an idea for cost, and that's the existing system of assessed contributions under the UN. But the IAEA is also under profound resource constraints today. If the agency or any other body is going to be in charge of non-proliferation verification post-disarmament, it's going to have to be properly resourced. And the fourth sort of issue is who's doing the verification? Are non-nuclear weapon states involved, and to what do they have access? Is the IAEA involved? Now, in a broadly disarming world, do we want a new international body to provide assurance that sensitive parts of the weapons dismantlement process are being implemented? Like I said, a lot of these are more questions than answers. So, the last part of the report and a session that we had during the workshop to which I referred reflects on a session that we held on tips from former negotiators. We had a strong panel of experts who took part in negotiations of arms control and non-proliferation vis-a-vis safeguards, fissile material reduction initiatives, and discussions under the Quad and IPNDV, and indeed other processes. It'll come to no surprise to any of you that many of our panelists knew each other, sometimes from having sat across the table from one another. So here are our takeaways from that session. First, we reflected on technical and substantive issues. Nuclear verification is a highly technical thing, yeah? So it's important that negotiators be able to boil down the essence of verification systems into policy-friendly language. The reason that this is important is that, while indeed highly technical, verification is also a negotiated element of an agreement, and therefore also a political choice. Red lines related to information sensitivity, equipment authentication, managed access, and other things have to be voiced early so that if there are insolvable conflicts about these issues, they can be worked around before positions are set in stone. Core negotiation trade-offs must be managed, for example, the ultimate goal or objective of the system. Are we talking completeness or correctness, so to say full accounting versus accurate verification of declared items? And that may depend on what's achievable. The required degree of confidence in the system will have to be balanced with its intrusiveness, so to say inspections versus remote monitoring, as well as efficiency will have to be balanced with the assurance the system provides, cost and scalability versus robustness. In terms of the systems themselves, the negotiators on the panel offered some suggestions for designing workable verification systems, and these include moving toward hybrid and layered approaches rather than single solutions, using sequencing and phased implementation to build confidence over time, and incorporating redundancy and cross-checking to strengthen credibility. Second is the role of language itself, and this is critical in any negotiation, especially when working in multiple languages, and especially when working in a language that is not one's mother tongue. Words carry different meanings across communities and countries, and one needs to be careful about assuming that your counterpart means what you mean, even if you're saying the same thing. The same word can mean different things to different people, and they might not have said exactly what you believe they meant. And in this regard, constructive ambiguity was identified as a useful technique, though a potentially risky one if, for example, parties later view compliance issues differently because of that ambiguity. Third is, again, communication itself. You're all diplomats. Effective communication, as you know, can help create a bridge between technical, political, and legal communities, framing proposals in ways that make them politically and technically acceptable. And this begins with making it clear about the ultimate objective or objectives. Now, while being clear about the real objectives, be flexible on how to achieve them. Good communication is a two-way process involving the identification of common interests with the counterpart and understanding the divisions or tensions both within the other side and indeed within one's own side, since frequently there are as many divisions within a given side internally as with the external parties. This is the two-level nature of negotiations that Nikolai will talk about in a moment. Focusing at the outset on shared objectives can facilitate progress by building trust and common goals, which can help pave the way for negotiations when they become more challenging because of a divergence of positions. Another key to communicating is active listening. Listening to the counterpart with a view to understanding what is being said rather than objecting to it, not only because it conveys an atmosphere of trust, but also because you might actually learn something from the team sitting across the table. And finally, we have the human factor. Human beings share a common humanity with egos and interests that need to be attended to for successful negotiations, and that is true whether the negotiations are domestic or international. But there are aspects of international negotiations, particularly in the context of sensitive issues that have national security dimensions that are unique. The importance of the individual cannot be overstated. Individuals can set a tone of trust and empathy without conceding negotiation points, or, alternatively, they can make even the most straightforward negotiations completely impossible. Among the key contributors to successful negotiations we have taken from this session are patience, persistence, respect, and critically, preparation and knowledge. So that was the major thrust of the work that we've done so far. We also wanted to leave you with some recommendations based on the outcome of the workshop, our research sense, and our collective expertise in negotiating nuclear verification. First, we need to sustain and transfer negotiation expertise. We need to take efforts to preserve the institutional memory from past negotiations, as we did during this Tips for Negotiators session, and pass them to the next generation of would-be negotiators, such that when new negotiations can commence, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. Second, and similarly, we have to maintain and expand capacity-building initiatives. We need to invest in them, in these capacity-building initiatives on nuclear verification and related negotiations, especially through things like workshops, simulations, and other practitioner-focused activities to help build the negotiation skills themselves, not just about verification by itself, but these skills to negotiate it. Third, support and expand multilateral verification initiatives. This includes government-centric multilateral verification initiatives such as the GSTE and the IPNDV. Fourth, revitalize and broaden technical cooperation. It used to be that the US and Russia had very extensive lab-to-lab cooperation, which supported arms control and the non-proliferation enterprise. And that, sadly, colleagues, is long gone. We argue that not only should that cooperation be restored, it should be expanded to include other nuclear weapon states, as well as non-nuclear weapon states, as appropriate vis-a-vis weapon-sensitive information. This cooperation lends itself to more workable solutions for verification and long-lasting personal relationships that can help make the impossible possible. Fifth, we have to better understand and communicate the cost and value of verification. It's no secret that nuclear verification is expensive, but we argue that the international community isn't very good at communicating what the return on investment is for that cost. This is true across arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament. As budgets are slashed across the board, more study is in order to help us better and in more concrete economic terms understand how funding affects verification effectiveness and the return on investment for effective verification. 6 of 7, I'm almost done. We need to anticipate the implications of emerging technologies. We have the AI boom, quantum technologies, and a myriad of other tech developing very rapidly. These technologies can support verification, and also they can pose challenges. We need to proactively research what those dynamics look like so that we can use these technologies effectively while mitigating any risks they might pose. And the last recommendation I leave you with is that we need to look into what future verification environments could look like, including preparations for an increasingly multilateral and data-rich verification set of considerations. While there is disagreement as to what this might look like in practice, states are increasingly looking towards multilateral verification models, supplemented by the huge amount of data out there. It's no longer the case that the nuclear powers have all the satellites, right? And open source information is playing an increasing role. This fact has to be acknowledged and understood in the context of future negotiations. Finally, what's clear from the implementation of this project is that, like negotiations themselves, advancing nuclear verification is an iterative process. Try and try again. Effective verification that is also feasible requires constant reflection on how policies are conceived, what technology is available, which actors should be involved, and how the benefits of verification are communicated with its stakeholders. Ignoring the value of that iterative process, so to say, refusing to sit down at the table, will come at a cost. With that mic drop, I will now turn the floor to my colleague, Dr. Nikolai Sokov, for his views from a practitioner's point of view, and again, here is the long-promised QR code. Thank you.
For a change, I don't have slides. Yes, I usually do, but this is not a lecture. It's more of a reflections, actually, from someone who negotiated, actually, verification for several treaties in the past. And yes, I'll start by referencing the Russian proverb that was actually made popular by Ronald Reagan. Trust by verify, and quite frankly, yes, it doesn't make sense. Yes, it doesn't make sense for a simple reason. We engage in arms control because we don't trust each other. So, yes, often kind of people discuss this like idea, though we need to restore trust to begin arms control. No, we need to start arms control because we don't trust each other. Maybe trust will emerge in the process of implementation, although well, in almost 45 years in the field, I have not yet seen that, quite honestly. So yes, in less than 2 months, actually, on July 1, it'll be 45 years. Most of being like in that field, yes, I've seen things, I've done things, so yes, I can say something about that. But that's why we need actually verification, because we don't have trust and we need to ensure smooth implementation. Most of treaties, the Non-Proliferation Treaty and other WMD non-proliferation treaties, yes, and nuclear disarmament in the end. Yes, And with respect to the letter to nuclear disarmament, actually trust is an extremely shaky foundation, by the way, because even if you only keep just a few nuclear weapons, that will be huge, actually, leverage, political leverage. The power is actually is in a non-nuclear world. So yes, we do need a lot of verification. It should be intrusive. It should be reliable. And we do need to do that. And when we talk about the present moment, we face two major challenges. And these challenges actually make our project that Noah described extremely relevant. So the first challenge is that we need to acknowledge that the very foundations of past arms control approaches should be fundamentally revised. So in the end, the past arms control was about regulating the arms race to make it safer and less costly, to prevent a large-scale nuclear war, and to eliminate excessive nuclear stockpiles. Well, quite frankly, we succeeded in doing all that, yes, all three tasks. Well, maybe not perfectly, but, well, quite well. The next stage, however, should be addressing not just the first use capacity in nuclear weapons, but entire nuclear stockpiles. The physical nuclear warheads that have never actually been addressed in any arms control treaties. We need to reduce and eliminate what now is considered essential, in fact, the limits that are established in New START that was concluded by the United States and Russia, yes, and which has expired a couple of months ago, are actually the bare minimum as far as these two states were concerned. If we want to go further down, this will be a whole new actually task. So this will set very considerably, maybe even quite radically higher standards for verification. Same is true for non-proliferation, incidentally. So in the past, well, quite honestly, nuclear weapons was a cutting-edge technology, and very few states had access to it. Nowadays, it's different. Almost any state that's prepared to take the risks and bear the costs can actually have nuclear weapons. So you have a much higher actual standard for verification of non-proliferation in the future. Incidentally, this availability of nuclear weapons technology is actually one very strong reason why non-proliferation regime cannot be supported by the use of force or the threat of force. Yes, and the JCPOA, with its very extensive non-proliferation, the verification regime was a much is a much better guarantee of the peaceful natures of the Iranian nuclear program than the war that we face today. Yes, and of course, what happens is if nuclear weapons are sought by a state that no one is prepared or willing to bomb. Sorry, it's about being slightly provocative, but these are things that are very much on my mind. The second challenge is that even as requirements for verification are growing, we're losing capacity. We simply don't negotiate anymore. That's a problem. During the 22 years of bilateral arms control during the Cold War from 69 to 91, the United States and the Soviet Union did not negotiate for the total of 5 years, like a few months here, a few months there. For 30 plus years after the end of the Cold War, the United States and Russia negotiated in total for about 5 years. We simply don't talk to each other. We're losing capacity to negotiate, and that's truly, I would say, actually tragic. We simply don't have that many people around who have hands-on experience in designing and negotiating verification systems for arms control, yes, and for disarmament too, of course. Yes, and when the process of arms control does in the end actually start again, we'll have to invent a lot of things from scratch. Once again, something that we did invent some decades ago. I don't think that we can afford that, or at least we should not be there. We should not find ourselves in reinventing the bicycle. Yes, and that's even more true for non-nuclear states. Yes, and that's, by the way, why we had the focus in the workshop on non-nuclear states. Non-nuclear states do want to see nuclear disarmament. Yes, they want the implementation of Article 6. Yes, absolutely. Oh, yeah, I fully support that. But when they demand from nuclear states to implement Article 6, you need to formulate these demands in a professional way with full understanding of everything that it entails. If you do not, the nuclear states will always have something to tell you and explain why it's impossible. So you do need a lot of professionalism in arms control and verification on part of non-nuclear states if you really want to see Article 6 implemented. The loss of capacity is important because knowing verification is not the same as knowing how to negotiate verification. So that's a critical, actually, difference. There's been a lot of NGO projects implemented over years on how you verify this or that. Well, and these are generally very good, is actually very useful projects. Unfortunately, the same authors very rarely ask the question, is my proposal negotiable? How can I make it negotiable? Yes, and moreover, it's really a moving kind of target because things that are not negotiable today might become negotiable later. So how you phase it, how you stage that process. Yes, and there is usually the lack of understanding that a perfect, very straightforward, very logical proposal or concept will hardly work because it has to go through the interagency process, then negotiations, then back to interagency, then ratifications, and so forth. Yes, and you cannot really go straight forward from a concept to the text of the treaties and then to implementation. It's a much more challenging process. Negotiations are not about bargaining. Yes, that's a common view. Yes, I think it's actually wrong. Yes, and especially negotiations on verification. Yes, this is a process that takes patience. Yes, and the art of asking and answering questions. Yes, and this is where the issue of trust comes in. States don't have to trust each other to engage in arms control, but negotiators must actually trust each other. Yes, and that's something that is developed over months and years at the negotiating table. You need trust between negotiators because you need to understand the motivations behind the proposals. Yes, in many years of negotiating several actual treaties, I have never seen a proposal, no matter how well-intentioned or well-crafted, that would be acceptable as is. It never happens because you can never fully take into account all the sensitivities, all the technical requirements, all the non-obvious consequences, the costs of implementation, so forth. You make the proposal and then you go through a long period of answering basically questions to explain the motive behind your proposal. Yes, and then you jointly try to craft something that will work for both sides. Yes. So once again, never ever I've actually seen a situation when a proposal and verification would be acceptable as is. It's always lengthy kind of process, yes, and you do need to trust the other side to work together with them. We know from history that sometimes, yes, you craft a new joint possible kind of position when you have to depart from your instructions, yes, and the other side too. So when you overstep what you can say, so you have to do that very quietly in the corner. Yes, I always actually joke that, well, of course, smoking is a bad thing, but in the past, during smoking breaks, you could actually come to some interesting kind of solutions. Yes, it has to be outside the table, yes, and you do need to trust your interlocutor. Yes, and we know from history that, well, in some cases, actually, when U.S. and Soviet negotiators came to kind of a common position, the Americans would report it to Washington as a Soviet proposal, yes, and Soviets would report it to Moscow as an American proposal. So yes, we did go through that because that new option, that new solution was above and beyond any guidance, official guidance. Yes, and that really points at the two-level nature of negotiations that Noah referenced, and people often simply don't really kind of fully appreciate that you negotiate simultaneously with the other side and with your own government. Yes, and quite frankly, everyone who's been there and done that will agree with me, as I heard from lots of people multiple times, that usually negotiations with your own government are much more actually difficult. Yes, yes, I know that too. So when you have continuous negotiations, you develop trust, you develop knowledge of how things are done. And when new people enter the field and join negotiations, they get inducted into these kind of relationships. So you have this atmosphere of trust kind of based interaction. Unfortunately, we don't have ongoing negotiations. The last time we tried that was for about 3 weeks, I think, in December 21. It's only 3 weeks. And unfortunately, we're losing that kind of quality. The second reason why capacity is so important for negotiations is because it's a multi-domain field. To negotiate arms control, including verification, you need to be versed in technical things like missiles, bombers, nuclear weapons themselves. So it's nuclear engineering, nuclear energy, physics. You need to understand military strategy and tactics. Yes, after all, you cannot negotiate arms control if you don't know how to plan a nuclear war. International law, political science, and a lot of other things. Yes, delegations are usually multi-agency, but nonetheless, every negotiator needs to have at least basic knowledge in all of these kind of things. And that can only be really achieved by hands-on experience. There are no schools that can train arms control negotiators. We have schools and programs that can train some business negotiations, but that's not the same thing. So yes, we're losing all that. And the workshop that we had in Vienna is in late February, right? March,
April.
March. So in late March, did address some of the very key kind of things. of how you design a verification system. What challenges you will face when you do that, how you do account for various items like missiles, nuclear warheads, how do you can verify the elimination of nuclear weapons, the methods you can use, and how you achieve synergies of these actual methods, how you balance opposing requirements, such as intrusiveness or sensitivity, completeness and costs, and so on, which technical tools are available, how they can contribute to verification, the challenges that you might need to keep in mind when using these tools, how you negotiate and achieve an acceptable result, and so on and so forth. So these things we did kind of try to address. I think it was successful. I was really happy that we were able to organize that. We had a lot of practitioners teaching all that. To conclude, if we seriously think about resuming arms control and proceeding toward disarmament, if we look at enhancing the safeguards regime and creating a regime to verify a non-nuclear world, we need professionals who understand how to make it happen. Negotiating arms control and verification is a specialized area that is in many ways quite actually different from standard traditional diplomacy. Consequently, it does require specialized preparation. And I will conclude with the same thing that I started with. We do need to build up capacity. We need to save the remnants of the capacity that we developed over decades. And we need to build up capacity both in nuclear and non-nuclear states. Thank you.
Also an excellent mic drop. Thank you, Nikolai. So, colleagues, we have about 30 minutes for a discussion. I've already seen one hand, but please sort of indicate to me if you would like the floor. I will also ask you to please just very, very briefly introduce yourself when I do give you the floor so that we all sort of know whom we're talking to. And we'll start over here, and then I saw you gentlemen next.
Thanks for the presentations. My name is Mark Goodman, formerly with the U.S. government, worked on IEA safeguards, trilateral initiative, FMCT verification, a lot of these issues. But now I've retired and I'm with the Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. I wanted to ask if there's maybe another principle in here that you might want to incorporate, and that is not just problem solving in negotiations, but problem solving in implementation. Do you need to build into the verification regime the ability to resolve questions and disputes? Safeguards have a mechanism for doing that. The ABM treaty had a mechanism for doing that. New START had a mechanism. Other treaties haven't always done that. So how do you negotiate? First of all, how important is that, and how do you negotiate that into the regime? Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. I have an immediate response, and I'm sure Nikolai has thoughts as well. I will point out that you can certainly build these kind of mechanisms like these consultative commissions that were sort of common in many arms control agreements. You can build that into the agreement all day long. You then have to use it. And so part of this just comes down to the factor of political will. Are the sides who have developed the agreement with its verification system willing to use all of the aspects, all the tools available to them under that agreement? And when the answer is yes, then these issues, compliance issues, get solved often quite quickly and quite quietly. When it's like the INF treaty and they just never even bother to try, then yeah, that doesn't do you a whole lot of good. I see you have a two-finger, but Nikolai, perhaps you want to respond, and then we'll go back to you, and then to you, sir.
I actually agree with you, Noah, and just wanted to add, well, it might not be usually kind of seen from the outside, but implementation of any treaty is never actually smooth. You always have questions, suspicions, concerns. You always have some problems with the implementation. Some of these problems, by the way, never get resolved until the end. Yes, there were several major kind of contradictions with the implementation of START 1, for example. So yes, the treaty was successfully implemented, but some things just remain unresolved. So yes, and Noah is completely right. I think one of the main actually reasons why the INF Treaty died was the fact that the parties never really used the mechanism to resolve the suspicion about violation. Yes, and I will not say that violations are impossible. I myself actually dealt with a couple of small kind of technical violations, unintended. Yes, well, these things can actually happen. Yes, if you actually want to resolve them, you will. Yes, if you don't want to resolve them, yes, you create a big crisis. So yes, it's more about kind of the desire to keep the treaty going.
Indeed. Okay, thank you. So to you, sir.
Parliamentarians for nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. Firstly, a commendation for the really important, excellent work of the panel. And I echo what Professor Sokol has been saying. Addressing these verification issues is helping with the political process and it's helping with the implementation process. And I recall during the negotiations for the CTBT, it was when the verification work was brought into the negotiations that it actually opened up a lot of the way forward for the finalising the negotiations for the CTBT. So often it helps the negotiators see the possibility to get over some political hurdles. So it's really, really important work, and thank you very much. The question I have is picking up on the importance of the individual, which you mentioned in the introduction comments, and looking at individuals, technicians and officials from within states that might sometimes be the source of verification information which isn't picked up through national technical means or through verification instruments, in particular whistleblowers. And I don't see any reference, I just did a quick look through your draft, I don't see any reference to whistleblowers there. But, one example of that would be with Israel. It was a whistleblower who verified, information which was generally suspected, but it was a technician, who verified this, but there was no whistleblower protection for him, and so he ended up in prison. What about in, these disarmed agreements, bringing in whistleblower protection, and how can you do that? Because that could be a very important part of verification and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, I'll start and then turn to Nikolai or Ambassador Facinotti if he wishes. I will say the importance of the individual, we can look at various sort of categories of individuals here, yeah? A lot of what we have talked about in the report referred primarily to political leadership, the individuals who are at the negotiating tables, and sort of that sort of drive towards, through these long-standing relationships, pushing an agreement over the line. Having said that, I do take your point in what I think is more and more being sort of in the open source community of in the nuclear field. I think these are certainly very good questions. Just sort of slightly different focus there. Nikolai, do you have any thoughts?
Yes. When you verify an agreement, one thing you cannot rely on is that there will be a whistleblower. So when you design and build a verification system, yes, you really kind of factor in your national technical means, your on-site inspections, tools, this, that. But yes, if there is a whistleblower, fine. Yes, that's really helpful. But what if such a whistleblower does not appear?
Thanks, Nikolai. We do have about 20 more minutes if others have questions. Please.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a student from Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Montreal, and also intern with the UNODA. So Dr. Nicola just mentioned that states don't have to trust each other to start negotiate. negotiation, but negotiators have to trust each other. How does we achieve that? Like to trust each other when states don't trust each other. And another question is, you mentioned that we need specific, intelligent, or professional people in this area. So what are the most important qualities do you think for the negotiators in this area? Thank you.
To the second question, well, anyone can become a negotiator as long as you got a job or assigned to that job. You may work for foreign ministry or defense or whatever, intelligence, or be like an engineer or something. Yes, you just assigned to the job. Yes, and if you take it seriously, yes, over time you will get kind of how to do that. And yes, in the past it usually helped that you had senior kind of colleagues. When I entered INF negotiations and Start 1 negotiations, my senior colleagues were people who negotiated SALT 2 in the 70s. So yes, there was like institutional memory. It was the same on the US side, although there, I would say the turnaround of people was faster. Yes, on how you develop trust, well, you just work with that person. Yes, you keep meeting, look at the table every day. You talk to them, you ask questions, you answer their questions, and well, that's how you start basically talking. Yes, and I like to tell a story of one relationship. We had to finalize one small side agreement. Yes, in the Start 1. In the context of Start 1, so yes, the ambassador called me. He said, well, you finish it. And yes, I was given the military advisor to help me as an interpreter. Yes, I went to a meeting. Yes, and also like a young diplomat on the US side came with a couple of advisors from the military. Yes, interpreters, same basically job. Only 5 words. Yes, on a small agreement. We started the meeting at 10:30 in the morning. We adjourned at 5 in the morning next day with no stop negotiations. Yes, all the food was actually brought to the table. We finalized 3 words out of 5. Yes, I had a pretty good idea how to finalize the remaining 2, but that would exceed our instructions. So after that marathon, basically kind of session, we became very good friends. Yes, families. Yes, actually, yes, we'd kind of meet as families. Yes, visited like each other. Yes, and kept our relationship long after we both actually left government service. Yes, by the way, his family owned the chocolate factories, and we always had a wonderful, actually, basket for every Easter. So yes, lots of trust was developed after that.
I will say I'm not a negotiator, but I sure hang out with a lot of them. One of the anecdotes that came out during the session we had during the project on tips for negotiators was, and obviously taking names out of the equation, two diplomats from countries that didn't always like each other very much were having a debate on something. And one side was just, rah, 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 we're so upset, how could you even put this on the table? And the person on the other side of the table listened, like I said, active listening, let the person finish and said, so let me see if I understand what you're telling me, and parroted the message back to the interlocutor. And the guy said, yes, that's what I was saying. Said, let me tell you why my government will not let me do this. And this goes back once again to the importance of the individual as, you don't have to be nasty to your interlocutor, and your governments may not always like each other very much, but, it's this kind of personal respect from the individual that allows, back me up, Nikolai, one, to trust each other and get gift baskets as well. So, yes, please.
for the European Leadership Network, but I also support the German delegation during VerfCon. I have actually 2 questions, but sorry. First of all, congrats to the report. I already read it, and it's really interesting. I have 2 quick questions. The first is whether VCDNP is already planning for a second follow-on workshop, and if so, what that could look like. And my second question is whether you plan to be involved in the 4th phase of IPNDV, and whether you already have an idea what that could look like. Thank you.
2 excellent questions. I will say I sort of queued up in our recommendations that this kind of activity is, I think, beneficial on the long term. Without getting sort of too deep into the what's next part, I think it would make sense for us and others to continue doing these kind of activities to ensure that the capacity issues that I and Nikolai discussed, why reinvent the wheel, right? We have the practitioners today who can, contribute to these kind of workshops and simulations to ensure that the capacity is maintained. So, anyone who runs events for a living, you'll know first time can be, not everything goes as smoothly as one would hope, but, there's certainly things that we could do. Well, it was pretty smooth. There are certainly things that we could do differently for different audiences, but, we'll definitely be looking to continue. And, I can't comment either way on IPNDV, but I will tell you that, this is one of those government-centric initiatives that I think is so important. The governmental and non-governmental channels are often portrayed as at odds with each other, and they're not, which, once again, many thanks to the government of Switzerland for recognizing that sort of duality. But IPNDV next steps will be what IPNDV states decide that they want to do. I will just repeat my call for more support for these kind of initiatives when, we need them most. Do you want to chime in on that at all, Nick? No. Colleagues, we have got about 10 more minutes. Please, sir, go ahead.
Here from Nonviolence International. What kind of role do you see that maybe civil society can play in certain kinds of scenarios here? I mean, we do have the Red Cross, which does Geneva Conventions. I know Bugwash at one point was working on the scientific community and how they could monitor nuclear tests around the world through ground earthquake monitors, networks around the world that could detect nuclear tests. What are the opportunities for civil society to be involved in certain ways in the future, and what are some of the strengths and weaknesses that come with that?
That is an excellent question. I have a couple of immediate sort of reactions, and then again we'll pass to Nikolai. And Ambassador, if you want to chime in on any of this, please don't hesitate. One of the biggest benefits of civil society involvement in these issues is just getting the information out there to stakeholders that might not receive that information or might not trust that information depending on its source. Right, so one of the things that we have done with this is, the reason we've got this fancy report is so that we have an evergreen material for not just negotiators themselves, but for the general population to better understand the complexities that go into this. And, we are not an advocacy group. We're, as I like to say, aggressively neutral. But, civil society organizations that do have an agenda, and there's nothing wrong with that, can help better convey this information to their constituencies in such a way that there's understanding among the general population why this is important. I think of the early days of protests against nuclear testing, right, where thousands of scientists from the US and Soviet Union signed letters to their governments to say, maybe stop that. Civil society does have a voice. And the other thing in terms of communications that civil society can really be good for is communicating, in particular, the return on investment for this kind of activity. And I made reference to this in my initial remarks, but I do, of course, mean economic return on investment, but, bringing more clarity as to how effective verification and other things like risk reduction and so on actually make us safer in tangible ways. I think that at least a lot of people who spend their lives sort of connected to the news cycle tend to get a little bit cynical about these things, and I get that, but these are two sort of big things that civil society does that I think governments would have trouble doing with the same, getting to the same people. But Nikolai, do you have any thoughts on that?
Civil society does help to set the agenda, to create awareness, yes, and to put some pressure on governments. Yes, if you don't pressure governments, they likely will not do anything. Right. So it's really, really vital. One thing that I would like kind of to emphasize here is that we don't have that anymore. Okay. Yes, I remember the early 80s. Yes, the Euromissile crisis and blah, blah, blah. Well, you know, it was a really big issue for the public. We have same things actually going right now. Yes, and I don't see any public involvement, right? Yes, and that's why you can deploy as many missiles as you actually wish. Yes, and you don't have to negotiate. It's worth really recalling that INF negotiations in the fall of '81 is actually started as the result of very strong public pressure on governments. We don't have that now, yes, and we will not see negotiations. Well, of course, it does have actual limits because civil society might not be aware of a lot of technical, financial, like legal, this, that, other issues. But yes, the general atmosphere is to a large extent actually set by civil society. And one more thing about civil society is that it's an open-ended, basically, enterprise. Sometimes you keep trying, you keep pressuring, yes, and you don't see a result. Yes, and one thing that you must not actually do is to drop the ball. That's kind of, unfortunately, it's a feature right now. Yes, you look at, for example, various kind of foundations or something, these organizations. Okay, we have not been able to achieve nuclear disarmament in whole 15 years. So yes, we will not deal with that. Well, it doesn't really work like that. You need persistence. You need to keep pushing. You need to keep working. So in the end, yes, it'll pay off. But if you drop the ball too early, yes, you'll achieve nothing. So, so patience, patience, and patience. Yes, it might not be easy, but yes, that's really the only way to go.
I would also, before we move on to answer the second part of your question, is less what civil society can do, more what governments can do to support civil society, and that's facilitating involvement in these kinds of meetings. You know, it depends, of course, from, you know, are we talking the IAEA or the NPT? Are we talking, you know, the meetings here in New York? Or are we talking in Geneva or whatever? But as much involvement of civil society, and I mean meaningful involvement, not sort of having a, you know, NGO room off to the side, I think is really conducive to allowing civil society to better understand how these meetings actually run, and what the practical implications, limitations are for, you know, sort of which rooms civil society can be in. You know, no NGO is demanding to be in the small secret negotiations, but just seeing the NPT review process play out, I think, is enormously valuable to civil society's ability to make an impact on these meetings. Yes, so colleagues, we have 6 minutes remaining. If there's something relatively fast, I'm happy to entertain it. Yes, please, Ksenia.
Ksenia Bernavska from Open Nuclear Network. Thank you for the project. It was a really great presentation. I have a short question about what are some possible ways to engage potentially nuclear armed states outside of the NPT in this kind of conversations, maybe at some informal tracks, and do you have that ambition maybe for the future iterations of your project?
Control, in fact, has always happened outside the NPT context. Yes, especially since it's arms control and not nuclear disarmament. Yes, and so far we have not had any negotiations on nuclear disarmament. Yes, arms control and nuclear disarmament are very, very different things that started kind of to get lumped kind of together in the 90s, but that was a mistake. Yes, they're very different. I seriously doubt you can actually do any arms control. Yes, and yes, even nuclear disarmament negotiations. Yes, in the NPT kind of context, these are sufficiently kind of separate. So yes, I'd rather actually see them more like in parallel, yes, and separate kind of forum. On that, yes, just want kind of to emphasize that I would dearly love to see not only nuclear states at the table, but also non-nuclear states. Maybe not right away, but I would love to see non-nuclear states at the table. Yes, and you do need to possess yourself with patience, because such negotiations will take time. They're very, very difficult. Yes, and yes, again, about capacity basically building. Non-nuclear states will have nothing to do at the table if they do not have the professional capacity. You have to come to these meetings very much prepared. Yes, yes, and you need to understand what the hell all these nuclear states are actually talking about. So yes, capacity, yes, and again capacity.
Thank you, Nikolai. So I totally agree with everything that Nikolai has just said. I would simply add that I think, having agreed with what Nikolai has said, I think that in the NPT world we tend to sort of almost silo ourselves. That, this doesn't have to do with the nuclear armed non-NPT states because we're in the NPT, and that's, I mean, for all the practical limitations that Nikolai just pointed out, again, totally on board. But one of the things that we sort of discussed during the project was, particularly in times where large-scale agreements are not necessarily on the table, there's a sort of patchwork approach that one can look at that could involve non-NPT states, and why not? But I think all the practical limitations that Nikolai pointed out, dictate when, how we could even look at doing that. I'm going to first turn the floor back to Ambassador Facinotti for a few closing remarks, and then I have one more thing to say, and we'll let you guys have the rest of your day. Ambassador, please.
Thanks, Noah, and I'll be very brief. I just want to thank everyone for showing up and for engaging. I hope this has been valuable to you. Certainly it was a very good project for us. Please also have a look at the report. There's a lot more information in there than Noah and Nikolai were able to cover during today's session. And also, if some of you colleagues are interested in pursuing this line of work, we're very happy also to discuss that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I do want to join you in thanking everyone who took time out of your busy schedules to come join us for this conversation today. Once again, there is a QR code right at the top of the screen to download the report. And for those of you who are at home with us in Vienna, let me know if you want a paper copy. I want to take this opportunity just one more time to thank the government of Switzerland for the generous support that allowed us to conduct this project, and anyone who would like to discuss this further, as Ambassador Facinotti said, there's a lot more in the report than we could fit into a presentation and still allow for discussion, but we're here to chat. And just because I am able to abuse my privilege as the chair, I've always wanted to do this. Thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.